this is Arne Koets from the Kemenate in Lauwgreuden, and I wanted to talk a little bit about shield use, rein use and weapon use in conjunction with one another. And this has to do with the position of the elbow of the rein hand and thereby of the shield arm of the rider in historical depictions. Now there was a bit of a discussion about this a little while ago, and I've been meaning to make a video about it for a while. I hope I won't be too long because this is an extremely complex topic. Some of the examples shown in this discussion are actually a very broad section of history. 13th century, 14th century, late 14th century and 15th century. Now shields from these periods are quite distinct. So thereby a lot of the individual depictions, if you really want to analyze them, would be like a half an hour discussion of each and every one. So we're not going to do that. However, one of the things we need to bear in mind is that we're used to, these days, of having relatively long reins. So the reins on the curb in this case, on this particular bridle, are the ones you would use somewhat like this, where you would have a loop sticking out of your hand. For medieval depictions and medieval bridles, this is quite uncommon. It is seen, but rarely. In the 13th century, this is a little bit more common, and they might loop it through their belts, for instance, like that. That is seen, for instance, and they have rings at the end of it. However, by the 14th and 15th century, this is the more uncommon type, and this, what we see here on the false reins on this bit, is the more common way of doing it. You notice that it is not made to be held with a piece of the rein sticking out of my hand, instead just bridging over the top. Now you see that this is quite short, and when I'm just standing here I need to actually move the reins up on the neck of the horse in order to make sure it's not too short. And this is actually depicted when they show horses drinking, for instance, to give them space to extend their throat latch. Now the curb reins in this case are longer and thinner. So these were the ones that you actually do the work on, and these are the spare ones to the corner of the mouth. These do not have a curb action on them. So this rein does not have a lever, whereas this rein does. Now if I get my horse a little bit more up and going, because he needs to be a little bit more, yep, there we go. If he bridles on, I can hold this rein, and I can hold it bridging my hand. Now you'll see that if the horse is too relaxed, this would be too short, and that's why you then release it. And this means that my position of my hand is bridging like this. And that means that especially when the horse is moving and has a lot of impulsion, it will lift itself up and shorten its own neck. And then this rein would be just about the right length to, for instance, hold this strap in my case, or one of those ropes on the front of the saddle. You could also be holding the actual reins together with the saddle like this. Of course, meaning this rein in this particular case. I just don't want to shorten them too much right now. But when you're actually cantering and piaffing and terre-terring, that length would just about work out. And you can actually hold on to your saddle. This also means that when I'm getting smashed around jousting, for instance, I would not necessarily gob my horse through the reins, because I'm actually pulling on the saddle and not on the horse. And these are things that are described in the period manuscripts, also in text. So that's the way you use the reins. Now if I'm using the reins like that, and I have this rein somewhere here, then I also need to keep my hand in this one particular place. So when I'm using my weapons in different directions around my horse, I might need to turn my body, yet leave my hand in one place. And especially in armor, this might mean that I might turn myself like this, and then present my shoulder as such. So this has a lot to do with how then the weapons are used. Pause. So now I have suddenly magically gotten a targe. This is a mid to late 15th century targe, which you can see is the right size. This is based on the Philadelphia example. It is exactly the same size as the original, and also pretty much the same weight. Now, and I also have a lance here, and you can see the graper on the end of the lance. Now I didn't bring my cuirass, but if I'm bringing my graper on my arete sticking out of my chest here, I would need to have my hand fairly far forward. And And this is why it's important that my hand is not pulling the bottom of the shield too far to me, like you see in 14th century depictions of much larger shields, where they attach the lower arm to the shield by means of an N arm. This needs to fall, my hand needs to fall between my arete and the shield. So I actually need to wiggle it in there in order to be able to get the couch on the lance. Now, depending on where my opponent is, I might need to place my lance to the left, which is the normal position of an opponent in jousting, and you see that my shield is fairly perpendicular to the strike that comes towards me, even though my elbow could be almost anywhere I want and I have freedom to give my reins. Now the other thing is that I can now move it over here and target, say, a dragon, and you notice that I need to bring my elbow up in order to get this position while still being couched. We see this. We also see people simply disengaging from the shield and using the weapon by itself, or for instance using the weapon for defense and not so much the shield. All those permutations are shown. Now one of the things we see on the depictions of the period, we see that the actual attachment points are actually pretty much where these are, in the middle of the shield of these very curved concave shields. The lower attachment points are much more common on the longer, earlier Italian shields that come all the way down to the wrist. So they're quite long. These ones are much shorter, like for instance the shields of the Knights of Christ on the Ghent altarpiece, where we again see the attachment point for the guige coming around here and a bare lower arm. So these shields are meant to go in this sort of position and are actually sitting on the chest. So they're not really being held by a strap. Now if you were to try and keep the top of it from being knocked back by means of a strap on your lower arm, it is very easy to gob your horse under the impact, because your arm will move a long way. In particular if your shield is much smaller than the originals, or just a small size of original. Now if you look at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Philadelphia examples, the one in Dresden, all of these don't have much in the way of attachment points on the bottom, but they have them at the top. One problem is that most of the straps are missing, so there is an opportunity to reconstruct it like this, but we don't see any depictions of somebody riding with one of these later shields with the hand all the way up here. We see them down here. Pause. So, 13th century example where we see a shield actually gripped like this, and the target is at the bottom on the left, and the shield is used like this. Now you see that this position is necessary in order to bring the lance down past the corner of the shield, coming down like that to target down. So that explains also another reason why you might do this. Now one of the other things is that some of these depictions show sword guards where people are presenting their weapon in order to strike, for instance, downwards, and are turning their body in order to do so, in order to wind up for a strike. And on one occasion you might actually move your shield to have more access to the actual front with your sword like this, in order to get to your opponent, which is on your left front. So you're actually making space for your arm. And this is very similar to how we see swords and shields used on foot, with bucklers and various types of these shields, where we need to move them in order to accommodate the technique. So they are presented to defend against specific threats, and when there's no threats over here, I might actually cover myself like this by bringing this point up whilst coming over with my sword like such. So things like that might also be depicted. So it's an extremely varied subject where we see the reins, the type of riding, and the different weapons and the different approach angles of the opponent all mattering in how the elbow is held. It's not really for jousting to present the shield, because then I can just keep my elbow to my body and present the shield towards my opponent as a flat target. All the examples of weird elbow positions are due to other reasons, and they're quite many, and I didn't cover them all. So that was it. Thank you very much.